Welcome to Searching the Scriptures. Our Bible teacher will be Gunther von Harringa Sr. In this series of studies, we will be focusing on the book of Judges. Without further ado, let's look into God's Word, the Bible.
Welcome to Searching the Scriptures. This is going to be the book of Judges, part 6. And in lesson number 4, we began comparing two different citations, similar citations, Deuteronomy 7:22 and Exodus 23:29 through 30, in an attempt to try to understand the spiritual meaning embedded in these two interesting passages regarding the principle of by little and little. I'll read Deuteronomy 7:22 just to refresh our memory. And Jehovah thy God will put out those nations before thee by little and little. Thou mayest not consume them at once, lest the beasts of the field increase upon thee. And then if we go to Exodus 23, 29 to 30, we read there, I will not drive them out from before thee in 1 year, lest the land become desolate, and the beasts of the field multiply against thee. By little and little I will drive them out from before thee, until thou be increased and inherit the land. We're continuing our investigation in these two verses, hoping that God will reveal the spiritual import of driving out the remaining inhabitants of the land by little and little. And so far, we've discovered the following. Number one, we know that God set up these remaining nations as a test for Israel, according to Judges 2, 21 to 22, and verses 3, 1 and 4. So that would be Judges 2, 21 to 22. And there we read, I also will not henceforth drive out any from before them of the nations which Joshua left when he died, that through them I may prove Israel, whether they will keep the way of Jehovah to walk therein, as their fathers did keep it, or not. And then in verse 1 of chapter 3 of Judges, we read, Now these are the nations which Jehovah left, to prove Israel by them, even as many of Israel as had not known all the wars of Canaan. And then in verse 4, and they went to prove Israel, and they were to prove Israel by them, to know whether they would hearken unto the commandments of Jehovah, which he commanded their fathers by the hand of Moses. We've learned from Numbers 33, 55 to 56, and Joshua 23:13, in that they clearly stipulate that Israel's disobedience to God's express command to root out these heathen nations would incur God's severe judgment. That's Numbers 33, 55 to 56. Excuse me. But if ye will not drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, then it shall come to pass that those which ye let remain of them shall be pricks in your eyes and thorns in your sides, and shall vex you in the land wherein ye dwell. Moreover, it shall come to pass that I shall do unto you as I thought to do unto them. And then if we go to Joshua 23, excuse me, Joshua 23:13. Know for a certainty that Jehovah your God will no more drive out any of these nations from before you, but they shall be snares and traps unto you, and scourges in your sides, and thorns in your eyes, until ye perish from off this good land which Jehovah your God hath given you. Furthermore, we also have learned that the words become desolate and the beasts of the field in Exodus 23:29 are both references to God's judgment altogether. Now, today I thought we would look at the latter part of Deuteronomy 7:22. Where it says, Thou mayest not consume them at once, lest the beast of the field increase upon thee. This little phrase, not consume them as once, is really two Hebrew words. The first one, not consume, is Strong's number 3615. And them at once is Strong's number 4118. And these expressions, these two words together, only appear in one other passage besides here. And it's verse 7 of Psalm 143, which is actually a messianic psalm. And for those of you that are not familiar with that term, it relates to some aspect of the atonement, which we know occurred before the foundation of the world, and then in 33 AD was demonstrated as a living tableau, in which, and this is when Christ hung on the cross, and that was a demonstration or a tableau of the actual atonement that took place before the foundation of the world, when Christ had to become sin, he had to die, and he had to be annihilated. And the word consume that we find here in Deuteronomy 7:22 is translated as faileth here in Psalm 143 verse 7. And here Christ, as it were, since this is a messianic psalm, is pleading with God to hear his prayer speedily or at once. Of course, we know that he rose from the dead, he was victorious over death and annihilation, and he conquered all of his enemies in the kingdom of Satan in the process, because he is the essence of eternal life. And though we can't understand this with our puny minds, nonetheless, we know that this is exactly what took place. And I should also point out, in this psalm, there is also the root word desolate for the word become desolate in Exodus 23:29. But I'll go ahead and just read the entire psalm so you get a sense of what the context is. Again, this is Psalm 143. And when it says a Psalm of David, that's sort of a clue phrase that these are messianic psalms. David is a great type or picture of the Lord Jesus Christ. Psalm 143, hear my prayer, O Jehovah, give ear to my supplications. In thy faithfulness answer me, and in thy righteousness enter not into judgment with thy servant. For in thy sight shall no man living be justified. For the enemy hath persecuted my soul. He hath smitten my life down to the ground. He hath made me to dwell in darkness, as those that have been long dead. Therefore is my spirit overwhelmed within me. My heart within me is desolate. And again, this is the root word for the word become desolate that we looked at in Exodus 23:29. And that is a word that we discovered has everything to do with judgment. Verse 5, I remember the days of old. I meditate on all thy works. I muse on the work of thy hands. I stretch forth my hands unto thee. My soul thirsteth after thee as a thirsty land. Selah. And here's the verse that we're most interested in, verse 7. Hear me speedily, which is this word at once in Deuteronomy 7:22. O Jehovah, my spirit faileth. And this is the word consume in Deuteronomy 7:22. Hide not thy face from me, lest I be like unto them that go down into the pit. Cause me to hear thy loving kindness in the morning, for in thee do I trust. Cause me to know the way wherein I should walk, for I lift up my soul unto thee. Deliver me, O Jehovah, from mine enemies. I flee unto thee to hide me. Teach me to do thy will, for thou art my God. Thy spirit is good. Lead me into the land of uprightness. Quicken me, which is an Old English word for make me alive. O Jehovah, for thy name's sake, for thy righteousness' sake, bring my soul out of trouble. And of thy mercy cut off mine enemies, and destroy all them that afflict my soul, for I am thy servant. So we see that in chastising Israel, God stopped the Israelites under his divine sovereignty from rooting out the inhabitants quickly, as he had done previously. And we read about that. Actually, we could look at that in Deuteronomy 7, 23 to 24. And you'll notice the dual usage of the word deliver. This is Deuteronomy 7, 23 and 24. But Jehovah thy God shall deliver them unto thee, and shall destroy them with a mighty destruction until they be destroyed. And he shall deliver their kings into thine hand, and thou shalt destroy their name from under heaven. There shall no man be able to stand before thee until thou have destroyed them. And so we see that before they rebelled, God gave the command that he would deliver their enemies into their hand right away. and then they were to destroy them. But because they didn't, now God says, I'm going to deliver them into your hands, but it's not going to be right away. It's going to be little by little. Another passage that we can look at is in this. I want to spend a little bit of time on this word deliver, which is an interesting word. It's actually the word Nathan, and it's spelt the same as Nathan the prophet, who was alive during the reign of King David, and it's Strong's number 5414. And that is the word that's used twice, as I just mentioned, in Deuteronomy 7:23 and 24, in these two verses here. But if we go to Leviticus 26, 4 and 6, we find it's used there actually 4 times, but it's translated as I will give or shall yield. And what's interesting about this passage is that it has a beautiful 7-fold blessing that God lists if the Israelites, in coming into the promised land, were to obey God's commandments. And remember, to obey is really another word. It's really synonymous with the idea of love. Love has to do with obedience, as Jesus says, if you love me, keep my commandments. So this is Leviticus 26, 4 and 6. Leviticus 26, 4 and 6. Then I will give you rain in due season. Actually, I'll back up to verse 3. If you walk in my statutes and keep my commandments and do them, then I will give you rain in due season. Number 1, and the land shall yield her increase. Number 2, and the trees of the field shall yield their fruit. Number 3, let's go down to verse 6. And I will give peace in the land. Number 4, and ye shall lie down and none shall make you afraid. Number 5, and I will rid evil beasts out of the land. Number 6, neither shall the sword go through your land. Number 7. And this word is really has to do with the promises that God gave to the Israelites. And we want to look at that in just a little bit. But before we do that, I want to look a little closer at this word at once that we find in Deuteronomy 7:22. It's Strong's number 4118, and it really underscores the immediacy of whatever is in view. For example, if we go to Exodus 32:8. We read there, and here it's translated aside quickly. And remember, the context here is when God tells Moses to get down from the mount because the Israelites have made the golden calf and they're worshiping it. And the Lord said unto Moses, verse 7, Go, get thee down, for thy people, which thou broughtest out of the land of Egypt, have corrupted themselves. They have turned aside quickly out of the way which I commanded them. They have made them a molten calf, and have worshipped it, and have sacrificed thereunto, and said, These be thy gods, O Israel, which have brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. They went right back to worshiping the gods of Egypt. The golden calves were Egyptian gods. And in a very short period of time, in spite of all the miracles that God did before they left Egypt, and then the crossing of the Red Sea, and now what are they doing? They are going right back immediately to the gods of Egypt. They left Egypt, but the problem is Egypt was still in their hearts. Their hearts had not become saved. They had not become redeemed. And so they were acting as natural unsaved men. We can also go to Deuteronomy 28, verse 20. Deuteronomy 28, verse 20. And this whole chapter has to do with the blessings of obedience as well as the curses that would accompany disobedience. And this has to do with a curse. Jehovah shall send upon thee cursing, vexation, and rebuke in all that thou settest thine hand unto for to do, until thou be destroyed and until thou perish quickly. That's our word, Strong's number 4118, or at once, as we find in Deuteronomy 7:22. Because of the wickedness of thy doings whereby thou hast forsaken me. And we see this pattern, if you remember, even during the time of right before Saul became king, the people wanted a king like every other nation in the world. They wanted a king. And God tells Samuel, they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me. They had rejected God. They didn't want God to be in charge of them because God was married to them. It was a theocracy where God ruled. An earthly king didn't rule like all the other nations, but that's what, in their wickedness and in their rebellion, that's what they wanted. They wanted to be like every other nation. They didn't want God to rule them, which is the best rule, the most benevolent rule, the kindest rule imaginable, and a perfect ruler, a righteous ruler. We also can go to Zephaniah 1:14, and this will be our last example with this word at once. Strong's number 4118. This is Zephaniah 1:14. And again, this is talking about the day of judgment, the day that we are now living in, that we have transitioned in as of May 21, 2011. The great day of Jehovah is near, it is near, and hasteth greatly. And this word, and hasteth, is Strong's number 4118. Even the voice of the day of Jehovah, the mighty man shall cry there bitterly. I'll read on down to verse 15. That day is a day of wrath, a day of trouble and distress, a day of wasteness and desolation, a day of darkness and gloominess, a day of clouds and thick darkness. Now, one thing, coming back to this word 4118, Nathan, as I began looking at this, I was just amazed at the sheer number of times that God uses this word, almost 100 times, with regard to the promises that he gave to the patriarchs, starting in Genesis and going all the way through the 5 books of Moses, and Joshua right up until the book of Judges, the beginning of the book of Judges. And it's just astounding how God emphasized these solemn promises over and over again. And he keeps repeating them and reiterating them, wanting to remind the Israelites, and of course, ourselves in turn, are reminded of this, reminded of his perfect and faithful righteousness and integrity. Now, I'm not going to read all of these close to 100 verses right now, but what I would like to do is to read a few of them from each of those books. And, the bottom line here is that, God is saying in so many words, you can trust me. You can depend on me, because I have given you my word with regard to these promises that they would enter into the land of Canaan, the promised land, a picture of heaven. And that really has to do with the inheritance that all believers that have ever lived, all the members of the body of Christ, are going to, they are written in the Lamb's Book of Life, and they are the inheritors of all of these promises. But God doesn't, he would just have to say it once. He doesn't have to keep repeating himself. All he has to do is say it once, and that should suffice us. But in his mercy and in his grace and generosity, we find that he goes beyond any kind of call or duty that is necessary to remind us of these promises. And I think this is a great comfort and a great blessing to many of us who have gone through the end of the church age. We've gone through the great tribulation, and now we are in the day of judgment. And we can become weary, and we can become disheartened. And so I think that we need to be reminded of the sheer number of passages in which God promises that the believers will inherit the land. And I think we also, in light of this, need to keep in mind a couple other passages. They're both in Luke. One is Luke 18:1. Luke 18:1, and then Luke 21:28. And I think that this is really appropriate for our times right now. Okay, Luke 18:1, and he spake a parable unto them to this end, that men ought always to pray and not to faint. Also a few chapters over, Luke 21:28. And when these things begin to come to pass, then look up and lift up your heads, for your redemption draweth nigh. We can certainly pray, and we can certainly keep our focus where it should be, on things above. Now, here are just a few of these passages from Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and Joshua, just to give a little flavor of the fact that God has placed over close to 100 of these verses from Genesis all the way to the beginning of the book of Judges. And I know that for me it was quite a surprise to read so many verses over and over again where God is repeating these wonderful, marvelous promises. We'll look at the first one in Genesis 17, 5, 6, and 8. Genesis 17, 5, 6, and 8. And here in these passages, we're going to find three references with the name Nathan, or 54:14 is the Strong's number. Neither shall thy name any more be called Abram, but thy name shall be Abraham. For a father of many nations have I made thee. This is Strong's number 54:14, have I made thee. In verse 6, and I will make thee, that's not the right one, and I will make thee exceeding fruitful, and I will make, the second one is Nathan, Strong's number 54:14, and I will make nations of thee, and kings shall come out of thee. And then verse 8, and I will give, and this is again Strong's number 54:14, and I will give unto thee and to thy seed after thee the land wherein thou art a stranger, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. Also, similarly, we can go to Exodus 6, verses 4 and 8. And I have also established my covenant with them, to give them the land of Canaan, the land of their pilgrimage, wherein they were strangers. Again, here it's with them to give. And in verse 6, wherefore say unto the children of Israel, I am Jehovah, and I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians, and I will rid you out of their bondage, and I will redeem you with a stretched, I'm sorry, that was the wrong verse. It's verse 8. And I will bring you in unto the land concerning the which I did swear, to give it to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, and I will give it you for an inheritance. For an heritage, I am Jehovah. And I will give, again, Strong's number 54:14. We can also go to Leviticus 25, verse 2 and verse 38. Leviticus 25, 2 and 38. Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, when ye come into the land which I give you, then shall the land keep a Sabbath unto Jehovah. And verse 38, I am Jehovah your God, which brought you forth out of the land of Egypt, to give you the land of Canaan, and to be your God. And then lastly, we're going to do Deuteronomy, then we'll go to Joshua. This is going to be Deuteronomy 26, 1 and 2, 9, 10, and 15. Deuteronomy 26, 1 and 2, 9, 10, and 15. And it shall be, when thou art come in unto the land which Jehovah thy God giveth thee for an inheritance, and possessest it, and dwellest therein, that thou shalt take of the first of all the fruit of the earth, which thou shalt bring of thy land, that Jehovah thy God giveth, and shall put it in a basket, and shalt go unto the place which Jehovah thy God shall choose to place his name there. Then we can go down to 9, 10, and 15. And he hath brought us into this place, and hath given us this land, even a land that floweth with milk and honey. And now, behold, I have brought the first fruits of the land which thou, O Jehovah, hast given me. And thou shalt set it before Jehovah thy God, and worship before Jehovah thy God. And lastly, verse 15 of Deuteronomy 26, look down from thy holy habitation from heaven, and bless thy people, Israel, and the land which thou hast given us, as thou swearest unto our fathers, a land that floweth with milk and honey. All right, we're going to do one more passage, and this is going to be Joshua 1. Joshua 1, and let's see. Joshua 1, 2 and 3, 6, 13, and 15. All right, Joshua 1, 2 and 3. Moses my servant is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, thou and all this people, unto the land which I do give to them, even to the children of Israel. Verse 3, every place that the sole of your foot shall tread upon, that have I given unto you, as I said unto Moses. And then verse 6, be strong and of a good courage, for unto this people shalt thou divide for an inheritance the land which I swear unto their fathers to give them. And then verse 13, remember the word which Moses, the servant of Jehovah, commanded you, saying, Jehovah your God hath given you rest, and hath given you this land. And also verse 15, until Jehovah hath given your brethren rest, as he hath given you, and they also have possessed the land which Jehovah your God giveth them. Then ye shall return unto the land of your possession, and enjoy it, which Moses, Jehovah's servant, gave you on this side Jordan toward the sun rising. Well, it looks like we've run out of time in today's study, and so we'll continue our examination, Lord willing, of the book of Judges next time.
Thank you for joining us today for Searching the Scriptures. Until next time, to God be the glory.